Welcome everyone. Today we are going to go back to a little bit more of a traditional painting with this wine still life. And today I'm going to use my black Frederick's canvas sheet. And this is 12 by 16 like usual. Now I am going to add a grid to my canvas sheet here. And then I'm going to draw the image on, and you can download the image with the grid on it in the video description below. There's a link to where you can get it off of my website for free. And my Patreon group does get a tracing element. So if gridding isn't your thing, I almost always provide tracing elements for our more complex paintings to my Patreon group. If you need a little bit more information about how to grid, also check out the video description below, because I have a link there to a blog post where I wrote out in quite a bit of detail how to grid an image. And here, if you can't tell, I'm using a 1-inch grid. So since this is a 12 by 16 inch canvas, it's got 12 squares one direction, 16 the other direction. So we're just going to speed through this part where I am adding the image to the grid. This part did take me about 45 minutes to draw, including the grid. So all of it, adding the grid and doing the drawing, is about 45 minutes. Now that I'm done with the drawing, I'm going to go to my 5/8 inch angle brush, and I'm going to start by mixing up some burnt umber, yellow oxide, and Payne's gray. And every time I go back for more paint, I'm going to mix up a little bit of a different version of those colors. I'm adding in some unbleached titanium as well, but you could use regular titanium white if you like. I'm just starting around the edge of the cask here, the little ends to the planks that make up the cask. And so each one of them, I'm going to keep a bit of a different color. So some will be darker, some will be browner, some will be more yellow. And I tried to edit out a lot of the color mixing and things like that, because this is quite a long video. I'm not really paying a whole lot of attention to the reference image at this point. I'm not trying to make the wood look exactly like it does in the reference image. You can make yourself crazy trying to, really get down to little details like that here. So I'm just generally putting this on there how I feel like it should look. I'm keeping a little darker down there at the bottom because the shadow of the wine bottle and other elements are creating a bit of a darker area on the cask. I'm really just using the tip of the brush here. I have a lot of paint and I'm not trying to blend out all of my brush strokes. So I use a little bit of a heavier pressure to lay some of that paint down, and then just up onto the tip of the brush to kind of spread it, smooth it around, give it a little bit of texture. And in just a moment I will zoom it in so you can kind of see what that looks like up close. It went into my bottle a little bit there, so just wipe it off with my finger. Just kind of adjusting some of the values, making it a little lighter. And here you can see how I'm just really kind of dusting the paint there, and it's giving a little bit of texture and blending a bit and leaving some streaky areas. Since this is old wood, it doesn't need to be smooth. It can be very, varied in the colors and in the values and the textures. So don't try to make it too smooth. Same color mixture here, maybe just a little on the darker side, and I'm just generally putting in where you can see the wood on the sides. I'm not being too specific about it. I make a couple errors in here, but I'm not overly worried about it. primarily because this part of the cask, you know, it's not the focus. You're not really gonna spend a lot of time looking at it in the finished painting. So I don't have to spend a lot of time being real specific on it. I'm gonna mix up a color that's lighter and a little bit grayer and just kind of start scumbling that on with just the tip of the brush here on the, I guess the flat panel, the bottom of the cask. I like using a black canvas for images like this because, as you can see there, it's glowing through that color and creating some shadows that I don't have to work for too much and giving it a bit of an aged look already. And I really like that. If you don't have a black canvas, you can just paint a canvas black. That's perfectly fine. Or you can paint it any color you like. You know, if you feel like you want more of a dark umber type color coming through, then paint it brown. There's not a right and a wrong when it comes to underpainting. There's just what gives you the look you want versus what gives somebody else the look that they want. Just carving around the outline of my shapes. I'm really not terribly concerned about, you know, altering the shape of my elements because, you know, when I come back and fill them in later, I can make adjustments, which is one reason I'm painting the background first, because the background's not as important as the foreground. And if I paint the bottle and the glass first and then go and do the background and I accidentally paint over just a little bit, change the shape of one a bit, then I now have to spend time mixing up the exact same colors and repainting the glass and the bottle. So I just do the background first, and that way I can make adjustments to the shape of the glass and bottle as I paint them and not have to worry about it later. So painting this was interesting for me because, you know, as you guys know, I've been taking a break from painting kind of the more traditional, realistic type paintings that we've done quite a bit of in the past. And I've been doing a lot of experimenting and, you know, doing finger painting and doing a lot of color fields and some abstracts, and really just kind of pushing myself to think and do outside of the box. And part of the reason for that is because I feel like you can't learn and grow as an artist if you always do the exact same things. So, you know, I really wanted to push myself to do things that I might not be comfortable with, or things that I'd never done before, and think about color and think about composition and think about technique in completely different ways, because then I know when I come back to painting like this, it brings some of those lessons with me, and it changes the way that I paint a little bit. And I feel like it gives me a better understanding of, you know, color mixing and composition and application. So even though I'm not finger painting here, I definitely took lessons that I learned while finger painting and I'm applying them here, you know, whether it's some of the layering techniques I did while I was finger painting, or whether it's, you know, it just kind of changed the way that I use the brush and the way I think about blending. So that's one of the reasons that I always challenge you guys to do things that you might not be comfortable with, things that you might not even necessarily have a desire to do, because it's learning those things that helps you continue to grow and evolve as an artist. You know, if you just do the same thing day after day, every time you pick up a brush, you're going to get really good at that. But eventually you're going to plateau and you're going to have nowhere to go. And it can kind of get stale and boring. And for me, anyway, maybe not for everybody. but everybody's different, and that's okay. But if you feel like, you know, you want to get better at what it is that you do, that you want to expand your knowledge base, you want to be able to, you know, just increase the number of tools you have in your art box, then I really encourage you to do things you're completely uncomfortable with, and maybe even do things that you don't have any interest in doing, because it's all just learning experiences. Here, guys, I'm doing the exact same thing. It's the exact same color mixture, just lighter, just kind of playing with some highlights and shadow areas on that bottom of the cask. And I know that the shape of my wine glass is really off right now, but like I said, I'm not worried about it, because as I fill in the wine glass and as I add the shadows and the highlights, I change it anyway, so it's not a big deal. I am using a little matte medium here, but really it's just because that's how I like to paint. You don't have to use it for this part. This color is mostly just Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber, with some matte medium, of course. I don't think there's really any white or any of the yellow oxide in there, and I'm just lightly dusting that shadow in. The lighter color, I believe, is dry, so it's really not blending, but that's not an issue, because I can just come back and mix up a color that's somewhere in between and dust it over. But right now I'm just worried about getting the dark color in where I want it. See there, I pick up a color that's a little in between. It's darker than that light color and it's lighter than the dark color. And I can just kind of dust it over that line and blend it into each. I encourage you to learn blending techniques, you know, maybe through experimentation, like I was saying, finger painting and abstract work, things like that. Because I know I hear so often about how do you keep your paint from drying out? It dries so fast. I have a really hard time blending because it dries so fast. Learn how to blend wet paint into dry paint, which is really what I'm doing here. If you can blend wet paint into dry paint, then you never have to worry about your colors drying on the canvas. Again, another darker color. Just adding my shadow up there at the top, and that light color is dry, so it's not blending, but I'm just dusting it over the surface. Then I'm gonna mix up a color slightly lighter than what I'm using, but darker than what's there. And I'm just gonna dust over that line to make it appear that it's blended. I'm really only using the short corner of the angle brush and just almost scumbling it in. Like I said, I've really been enjoying this angle brush lately because it's so versatile. I can get nice sharp points with the tip of the angle brush. I can fill in wide areas with the flat part. I can get some good texture. It's just been kind of my go-to brush for the last month or so. And again, just kind of messing with that shadow back there. I don't want it to be too light behind the bottle and the glass because, you know, that's going to kind of throw off my light a little bit. Again, just using that short corner of the angle brush to kind of scumble and blend a bit. I have a clean brush, picking up some Burnt Umber and Payne's Gray. A little bit of matte medium. And I'm going to start making the shadow under the bands. So there's these metal bands wrapping around the cask. And I'm just running a bit of a shadow up underneath one of them. the closest one. So it's got a sharp edge toward the back where it meets the metal band, and then that dark line kind of fades. It blurs a little as it gets toward the ends of the wood planks making up the cask. If you need a reference image, if you'd like to look at the painting while watching the video or while you're painting, you can always see the image on my Facebook page or my Instagram page, and you can kind of reference it there. I don't keep it up on the screen while I paint because there's very often not room for it. That, and sometimes it can be confusing. You know, if you look at the finished painting and it looks, the part that I'm working on is completely different than what you see me doing in the video, that could be confusing to you. And because I work in a lot of layers sometimes, very often it's going to look completely different until the very end. Just kind of lightening that shadow a little bit and adding a bit of a highlight to the top of the cask here. Using the exact same colors, just in various, you know, mixtures. It's always different every time I go back. Blending in that shadow, just a hint in the front there. As you can tell, I did speed up this video ever so slightly, not very much, but the video was fixing to be almost 3 hours long, and I did not want to make you sit through a 3-hour video. So I wouldn't really say this is time-lapse, but it is sped up ever so slightly. Again, back here, getting that shadow and starting to create one of the bands. I'm using the same colors for the bands, but I ended up not liking that, so I do come back in a little bit with a different mixture. But I'm just paying attention to my reference image, putting the dark color in where I see the shadows, and lighter colors where I see the wood and the bands. This is the band closest to the end of the barrel. There's 2 bands on there. And as you can tell, this color, it doesn't show up very well. It doesn't look much different than anything else, but I already started it, so I just go ahead and finish it. And in a little bit, I'll come back with a color that's a little bit different, a little bit warmer, and go over the band again. Down here toward the bottom, I wanted to keep it nice and dark because that's where, you know, it's got some heavy shadow. Even though there is a little bit of a bounce reflection, I'm not worried about that just yet. You can see in the reference image, there's a little bit of a highlight down on that underside where the light is bouncing from the grapes up onto the cask, but we'll deal with that at the end. Just reshaping the wood and the shadows and the bands and everything there, but I'm still not terribly worried about it. I'm not being overly specific. I'm just kind of finding where everything is. Now I've got some burnt sienna and my yellow oxide, and this is going to be a really warm color that I'm going to use for the tabletop. Just a hint of Payne's Gray to gray it down a little bit. And we'll start with the edge of the table. It starts to get into shadow over there toward the left, so I let the color just kind of fuzz out and become transparent scrub out some of those chalk lines. And if you feel like you're going to have a hard time covering the chalk lines, just erase them beforehand. So I just grabbed another pencil and just erased a couple of those chalk lines because I was afraid that I might still be able to see them. A little more of the burnt sienna and the Payne's gray. Get a nice darker color. And I'm lightly dusting it in there. It's a pretty thin amount of paint. A little heavier here where it's going to be highlighted and bright. And again, working toward a slightly darker version of that color on the right here. Now be really careful with the edge of your table. That vertical piece on the far right, you want to make sure, it looks like it's angled right now, it's just because the canvas sheet is bent, but you want to make sure that that line is vertical, straight up and down. Don't angle it. The temptation can be there to angle it, you know, kind of push it toward the right. That's going to warp your table and make it look strange. So make sure that it is straight up and down. Look at the edge of your canvas if you have to, and make sure that it matches that. There I took that same color and I added some of the unbleached to it to start creating the highlight area on the edge of that table. Some more Payne's gray and the burnt sienna. And we'll start scumbling that on the surface of the table and correcting the shape. I kind of misdrew my table a little there and had to make some corrections so it was all wobbly looking. But like I said, I wasn't terribly worried about it because I knew that when I came in to start painting that I would be able to make any adjustments to the drawing. So I don't worry about getting the drawing perfect. I just worry about getting it good enough. As you can tell in the reference image, there was like the valve for the cask sitting on the table here next to the cork, and I just felt like that element was unnecessary, so I left it off. But if you really want to, you can add it into your drawing. But that's the great part about being the artist, you know, you can make decisions. If you don't like something, leave it off. If there's an element in another reference image that you really wish to have in your painting, you can add that as well. You can change the colors. You can do anything you like. You are not obligated to create your painting exactly the way it appears in your reference image. Just a little bit of a brighter version of that brown mixture there. And I wanted to make sure to keep it warm but dark toward the back there, around the back edge of the table. And if the table's still wonky when I'm done here, it's not a big deal because when I paint the background, I can make adjustments to the edge of the table. Right, I'm going to use my number 8 filbert, and I've got some Diox purple, which you can't really see there, sorry about that, and some Payne's gray, and I'm mixing them together. I'm trying to keep them a little closer on the Payne's gray side. And I am adding just a little bit of unbleached titanium again, just to get a nice dark color that will show up on the black canvas. I'm just going to go in and fill in the top half of the grapes, create those shapes. I'm not worried about the bottom half yet because I'm going to use a different color mixture for that. So for now, just creating really the top halves. And make sure that your grapes overlap. You're not going to see, in a bunch of grapes, you're not going to see the whole sphere of each grape. There'll be some that you do, but most of them you will not. So overlap them. And notice I'm leaving some of my chalk lines, particularly where, you know, one grape overlaps the one next to it, so that I don't lose that. When I come back and do my highlights and my shadows in a little bit, I can paint over those chalk lines because that will help separate the shapes a little bit more. But right now, where I'm really filling them in with about the exact same color, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't turn it into a solid dark purple blob. And I kind of drew some little spots where I'll have stems and, you know, little bits of sticks poking out from between the grapes. Sorry, my camera wasn't sure if it should be focusing on the back of my hand or on the canvas. All right, a little bit more on the Payne's gray side there and a little more unbleached for a bit of a lighter color. See, I didn't want it to be overly purple here. Now I'm going to start adding a highlight. Now that highlight, notice I kind of put it in the almost in the middle of the shape, but it's like in the middle toward the right. Don't highlight your grape just around the exact outer edge because that kind of makes it look flat and one-dimensional. So my grapes are kind of being highlighted on the right-hand face with the brighter point being in more than on the outer edge. And that'll become more obvious as I go and I add more highlights. But just notice that I'm really highlighting kind of the right half of the grape, not keeping that bright area to the exact outer edge. It's keeping that highlight more toward the center of the shape that makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. It makes it look like a rounded sphere rather than a flat circle. A little bit more of the unbleached to get a nice pale color. And again, I'm going back in to amp up those highlights, and notice that bright point. It almost doesn't even touch the outer edge. It's really in the rounded part of the shape. There's a couple of dark areas between the grapes where I didn't, create a specific grape. And you can even take this lighter color and just put a little point of it in one of those dark shapes. You don't have to create a very specific grape everywhere. You can just kind of, suggest one by nudging a little point of color into a dark shape. Again, that nice pale color, that's a little bit of titanium white mixed in there. It's the same mixture, I just put a bit of titanium white in there to really amp up the highlight. Just using my finger there to soften some of the hard edges that I get in a brush stroke occasionally, because I don't think my grapes would have any hard edges on the inside of them. Back into the purple and the Payne's Gray. A little bit of matte medium, a nice thin amount, and I'm going to create the shadow side of the grape, so the bottom half. And I am going to allow that to dust a little bit over top of a bit of that highlight. It just changes the color a little. Because those colors are so transparent, I didn't lose the highlight. It just made little bits of it a bit more purple than others. And a lot of these little dark areas where you can see my grid and I didn't add any grapes, a lot of these dark areas I'm going to fill in with this Diox Payne's mixture. If you were doing this on a white canvas, you would really want to paint in the grapes much more dark and with fewer transparent colors, because otherwise the white of the canvas would really glow through and make your grapes very, very bright. And that's one of the reasons I liked using the black on this, because I didn't have to worry too much about that. All I really had to do was get a suggestion of the color I wanted for the grapes, add the highlights. So again, if you don't have a black canvas, I do recommend painting one black for this painting. I wouldn't try to do this on a white canvas, simply because I would spend so much time adding the dark colors in first. See, so I'm just going to fill in that whole dark spot with that dark shadow color that I made. Now there is another highlight on these grapes, and it's not on all of them. It's on, mostly the ones on the left up at the top edge. And so that's what I'm going to do now. I just mixed up a super light version of that color again, defining that top left edge and adding some of this highlight color. And I wasn't sure about it when I was first adding it. I thought this looks strange, but I figured, well, I'll just leave it. And then after I'm done with everything else and I can see it a little bit more clearly in context to the rest of the painting, then I'll come back and make adjustments to it. And I end up just leaving it. I think it ended up okay. So, sometimes when you're going along and you think, oh, that looks terrible, the best thing to do is to just leave it and wait until the end, because you may decide, oh no, that's perfectly fine the way that it is. But if you spend time trying to correct it right now, you may end up, making it worse, or just ending up with something that you actually didn't want at all. Okay, now I'm going to use some indanthrene and some cad yellow medium. It doesn't matter what blue. If you don't have indanthrene, just use a nice deep dark blue. And, experiment with your yellows and make sure that it's going to give you a green that you want. But don't worry if you don't have indanthrene. I'm still using my number 8 filbert, and I'm just loosely starting to sketch into the bottle here where I see the green in my reference image. It's okay if it's not exact right now. I'm going to come back and add highlights and shadows and everything. So right now I can feel confident to just kind of play around with where I might want this green to be. Making small corrections to parts of my bottle also. A little bit of a lighter version of that color, just a hint more yellow. I actually wasn't terribly happy with this green right here. I thought that it was too kind of blue and bright. I wanted it a little bit more olivey, but for the moment I decided not to worry about that and just kind of see what happened after I did the highlights, and then I could make some changes. Now I'm going into the Diox and some alizarin crimson, keeping it pretty dark and adding some Payne's gray, so it's really just barely a wine color. It's very, very dark. And I'm doing the same thing here that I did with that green. I'm just kind of putting it in, finding where I want it to go, cleaning up the shape of the bottle a little bit. Not overly worrying about, it being perfect. You could use a larger brush here if you want. I did draw all of my little highlight areas, so I was using a smaller brush so that I could make sure I didn't lose any of my highlight areas. And I am working a little bit slower. That kind of comes with the territory when you paint mindfully, is you end up slowing down a little bit. But also, I'm trying not to create overly hard lines with the color inside of the shape, because I wanted to keep the edges of my highlights on the softer side. So I didn't want them to be blurry, but I didn't want overly crisp lines. So I planned for that by not creating overly crisp lines with this color inside of the bottle shape. And just cutting around the grapes and the edge of the table. Because this color is so dark and I don't have to do any, blending or shading or anything like that, what I'm really focusing on is making sure that my shapes are as correct as they can be. Making sure that the edges of the bottle against the background are nice and crisp, and standing back to look at it and make sure that it's, straight up and down, not leaning one way or the other. And, making sure I don't lose my little sections I've designated for the highlights. Things like that. So I am being very mindful of what it is that I'm doing here. And you can see I've got my reference image on my phone there sitting on the edge of my easel. So even though I'm not drawing it anymore, I'm still looking at the one with the grid because I can still see my grid on the background, and that helps me make sure that I'm, still on track. Clean up that little bit that just got outside. So if you do go outside of your shape, just take a damp brush and you can wipe it away. A little bit of a lighter color again with that green. I'm still feeling that it's a little bit of a brighter color than I'm actually wanting, but it ends up being exactly what I want later, and I'll show you when that happens. My reference image does not have a bright green up in that corner of the bottle, but I thought that that looked nice and it felt appropriate to me, so I went ahead and put it there. We're going to start working on the glass now. I'm going to take some alizarin, a little bit of Diox, and these colors are quite transparent, so I'm going to put in just a hint of that unbleached, just to make it not quite so transparent. And I'm going to start filling in this large shape that I've designated for kind of the basic color of the wine. And it's still pretty transparent, which was letting a lot of the black through, so the color wasn't going to dry quite as vibrant as I wanted it. So I'm just going to keep laying this in, and then I'm going to come back and change it in just a little bit. And I think it worked out really well. If I were painting this again, I would probably do it the exact same way I did now, even though this first color ended up not being what I wanted. Just kind of putting this color roughly wherever I think I see it in the image. Again, that edge of the glass is really wonky and strange, but I'm not worried about it just yet. I'm sorry about the lighting. I know that sometimes it's a little darker than we probably want, and then, you know, the white, like that white paint there, is really bleached out and bright, but it's really hard to film on a black canvas sometimes. There I just mixed some cadmium red medium with the alizarin, and I'm dusting it in through there. And you may look at cad red medium and think that's just not the right color for wine, but I felt like it ended up being exactly what I needed. So as I was applying these colors on the wine glass, I thought, well, once I'm done, I can kind of glaze it maybe with some quinacridone to kind of bring that cool red wine color back. But I ended up feeling like it wasn't necessary at the end. Still filling in those little areas with the Cad Red Medium alizarin mixture. A little bit heavier on the Cad Red. And this section is pretty bright. It's almost a neon type color in the reference image, but I'm just using the Cad Red. That's one of the little reflections on the inside of the glass. Painting glass is something that a lot of people struggle with, and I hear a lot, how do you paint glass? How do you make it look transparent? You have to stop thinking of it as trying to make it look transparent, and instead just look at it and put the colors and shapes where you see them. That's really what it boils down to. Now I'm taking some Payne's Gray and mixing it in with my indanthrene. Whatever blue you're using, just mix some Payne's Gray in it. I'm using my number 2 round, I believe, because it has a nice sharp point. And I'm going to start kind of refining the edge of the bottle, adding in my shadows, and preparing to get to my highlights. So I'm just loosely scribbling in a little bit of that dark color, a little bit of matte medium to make it transparent so I don't lose any of that green if I happen to go over it. So yeah, painting glass, it's really as simple as looking at your reference image and saying, oh, there's a dark line down that left-hand side. Now you put that dark line there, and that indicates that the bottle is almost doubled there where you're seeing it because you're looking through, you know, the whole edge of the glass. And the other section, you know, making that color a brighter color, that indicates that you either have a reflection or you're seeing through the glass more. So it's not really about, you know, using transparent layers so that you can see this side and this part. It's really about just saying this little section that I see in the image is this color, and just putting that color down. And while you're painting it, it feels very strange. It feels like random bits of a jigsaw puzzle just kind of thrown together, and you think, that looks weird. That's never gonna look like glass. But once you're finished with it and you stand back and look at it as a whole, you get that effect of looking at transparent glass rather than little pie slices of different colors, which, you know, I definitely went through while painting this. I thought, oh, that color's so bright and weird, or this color is so strange, and felt like it was not going to translate to a transparent glass of wine, but it really did, I feel like. Blending that dark color down into the purpley red color, because they're both so dark and have quite a bit of Payne's Gray in them. You know, there really wasn't much difference in them when I overlapped them, so I wasn't worried about, you know, taking that dark blue over top of the red. A little more matte medium, make that nice and transparent. Just get that little shadow. It's a very thin line. And this kind of helps make that green a little bit more what I wanted it to be. You know, glazing it with some of that muted blue with the Payne's gray in it. When doing your reflections and your shadows and your highlights, the thing that's going to help you be successful is patience. Don't try to rush through it. Now I took that dirty brush, it's got the Payne's gray and the blue on it, and I mixed it into some yellow, and that little bit of Payne's gray mutes this color down so that this highlight that I'm putting on there is about the exact color of green I was looking for. I just needed that little bit of Payne's gray to kind of dirty the color a little bit of a brighter pop of it there, which actually is not in my reference image, but I really wanted to see a kind of a little bit of a brighter shout of that green in the bottle there. And just a little pop of it right up there on the edge of the lip of the bottle too. Back into our wine, I mixed up a color similar to my background. And I'm going to put it in here where the wine glass is about perfectly transparent. I mixed up my color a slightly bit darker than the color behind because, you know, when you look through glass, it does kind of darken the colors behind it a little bit. A little bit of it over on this edge. Notice I'm not going all the way to my line, so you can see that little dark line there is the canvas showing through where my pencil line is. And I actually end up leaving that at the end. I thought, you know, well, I'll come back and I'll do something to that later, but I really didn't. And I think that it worked out just fine. And a bit of that color over here, again, not going all the way to the very edge, leaving that little dark line and the pencil showing just a bit. So you want to make sure that you use a pencil that kind of blends in with some of the colors you're using. It's similar to the colors you're using, or at least, you know, maybe you can just barely see it, so that if it happens to show, if you happen to have a little of that pencil left at the end, that it doesn't really make a difference. You don't have to worry about getting rid of it. That color ended up being a little lighter than I wanted. Again, I'm still just painting the background that's showing through the glass, so I do want it to be just a hint darker than what the background actually is. Back into my alizarin, and I'm going to mix it with my cadmium red medium. Still using my number 8. A little bit of titanium white, just a bit, to make it a bit of a lighter, brighter color. And I'm gonna go over this highlight again and look at that color. That was so intense. And I thought, oh, that is the wrong color, but I'm just gonna go with it, change it later. And I felt like after it was all said and done, that was the perfect color. Is it different than what's in my reference image? Absolutely. Do I care? Absolutely not. I'm not trying to recreate the reference image exactly. I'm trying to make a painting that I enjoy, that I'm happy with. Same color mixture, just a slight bit more alizarin crimson than in the other sections. Much heavier on the alizarin here, and I'm just going to deepen this again. So that cad red medium is keeping the color from being too transparent, and the alizarin is keeping it closer to a wine color. Back to my number 2, into the Diox alizarin. A little bit of matte medium, and I'm going to start doing the kind of the top edge of the wine. So this is just the surface of the wine. And the reflection areas, the place where there's reflections, it will be a little bit of a different color, but I'm just going to make that line all the way across through most of them. And then I felt like that line was just too hard, so a little bit of matte medium and just kind of wiping over it just to soften that line ever so slightly. That's better. Just using that same dark color here. Fill in some of those little spots and just add a little bit of interest. The bottom, right here at the very bottom, nice and dark where the wine meets the stem. And now I can start working toward fixing up that edge of the glass. Because that glass is really flat and strange on that side. Just fixing up the shape of the reflection first. And now I can start messing with the shape of the glass. Make sure it's a little bit more rounded. I do come back in a little bit and do it some more. And I think I ended up with it being pretty much even. Just kind of scumbling a hint of that darker color into the base of that main section. Even though in my image it doesn't look like that, it's not, you know, it's not darker at the bottom of that large segment. I thought that that looked best, so I went ahead and added that. Now I'm getting some burnt sienna and some Payne's gray cleaned off my palette, as you can tell. A little bit of unbleached. And I'm going to start working on the bands. So I'm mostly working on the edge of the band to start with. That's where there's a nice reflection of the light. It's a little bit of a brighter pop that separates the band from the shadow. And then we can use that same color to start filling in the band. I'm not worried about covering all of that first color that I put down. This is just going to help add to the texture and some of the patina of the metal. Even adding a hint of indanthrene in there, especially to the shadow area. Creating the shadow where the band wraps over onto itself. There's a little bit of a shadow there. Bringing some of that shadow down into this section of the band as well. See, I'm actually leaving, at least for now, quite a bit of that first color, so don't worry about getting rid of that. A little bit of a lighter and warmer version of the color. And just scumble it in a bit. Almost dry brushing there. Little Payne's, little indanthrene, a little bit of matte medium, and just make sure that that's a nice dark shadow, but it's not lifeless because there is a hint of that burnt sienna and the indanthrene in there. So it's not just a lifeless black area. And I am still kind of cutting around the stems that I drew on there. I haven't put the stems on just yet. We'll do that in just a minute. If you're in doubt about something back here in this area, it's, you know, all really dark and kind of strange shapes. Just, if you're in doubt, just put it in shadow. There I just kind of made like a little swipe of that dark color, and I'll zoom you in there in just a second. And I'm going to get a much lighter color, and I'm just going to make kind of a little highlight on the top edge. So it's just two shapes, a dark swoop and a lighter blop, and that kind of makes a little rivet there on the band. Scratching in a bit of highlight with that exact same highlight color on the band. And there's the highlight of the rivet, a dark color, and just kind of swoop. And that's it. The rivets are super simple. It's just two brush strokes, two colors. Take that same highlight color and I'm just going to scratch in a bit of it right there. That one is going to be really pale because it's just light that's reflecting from the grapes up onto the underside of the cask. Just popping those highlights a little bit more. And back onto the edge of the metal strap. Just putting a nice highlight on there. paying close attention to my reference image to see where I stopped seeing it, and it wraps around onto the right farther than you think it might. Just daubing tiny little bits of this super bright color right on the edge there. Gives the metal strap a little bit of texture. Really dry brushing it on there so it's skipping. And see, now you can see those rivets. Just a light spot with a dark shadow. A little bit of that highlight on this strap in the back. Again, paying attention to my reference image to see where that bends over, where you stop seeing it. Just scumble in a bit of that darker color. Again, it's just all about texture and patina. Kind of like when we painted the Buddha, how I scumbled, lots of different colors together, and it all helped build toward that metal or stone look that we were going for. That's the exact same thing here. Just my colors are different, my brush stroke might be a little different, but the concept is exactly the same. And I almost forgot we have a little bit of that highlight right on this back strap. There we go. All right, back to the burnt umber and yellow oxide. Just a little bit of Payne's Gray to mute it down again. And what I'm going to do is start creating the texture on the end of the wood at the bottom of the cask. And I start with my angle brush, and I end up not liking that. It's not doing enough for me. So I am actually going to stop using it in a second, and I'm going to go to my Fuzzbert, which is my puffy old number 8 filbert. It really doesn't matter what kind of brush it is. I would just recommend that you use kind of an old brush that you're okay doing some scrubbing and stabbing with. Now this part, really I did the ends of all of these planks of wood the same. So I show you this little section I'm working on, and then I do skip a bit because it took me quite a while and I felt like you knew exactly what I was doing and didn't need to see all of it. So there I am with my filbert, just using that same color mixture and doing some stippling. I'm really experimenting with brush strokes here. I'm stippling, I'm scrubbing, I'm glazing, with some matte medium. I'm doing all kinds of different brush strokes to really make sure that this wood has a lot of texture, a lot of different colors, and just some age to it. I'm going to take my number 2 real quick, actually, with some Payne's Gray, and I'm going to make the little the little shadows between the planks. And then as I'm doing the texture, I can go over those little breaks a bit so that it's not this phony, hard black line. Back to the filbert and just kind of stippling and scrubbing and just creating some interest. I'm using the exact same colors. I'm just varying. You know, every time I go back for more paint, sometimes lighter, sometimes darker, warmer. Same thing over here. Just keeping that shadow under the band. And playing with the texture and colors on the end of this little chunk of wood. This is an area where you could get carried away trying to make it exactly the same as your reference image. So at this point, I wasn't looking at my reference image. I was just creating whatever kind of texture and color variation I found pleasing. So I'm just about done with these little ends of the wood. And like I said, I did the other ones exactly the same way. So we are actually going to skip a bit here and move on. So now I'm going to get some of that unbleached, a little bit of some of my brown colors, still using my Fuzzbert. And I'm looking for a color that's just a little bit lighter than that color, the lightest color on the bottom of the cask. And I'm just gonna kind of scumble in to really get a nice pale color right there behind the bottle. So it's nice and dramatic. Just dry brushing, scumbling over top of that. It's okay if I've got some texture because it's an old piece of wood after all. Adjust the shape of my bottle if I need to. And then some of that darker color just to soften that little line. A hint of that lighter color in the glass where the background shines through. And now we're going to go down to the bottom. So I mixed up a little bit of the yellow oxide, a hint of Payne's Gray, and the unbleached titanium for just kind of a neutrally yellowish color for the cork. I'm using my soft, or my nice number 8 filbert. This isn't the Fuzzbert anymore. But whatever brush you're comfortable with here. If you're comfortable using a round brush for this instead, or you know, a small angle or bright, whatever it is, use whatever you're comfortable with. I'm going to darken that color just a little bit with some more burnt umber and yellow oxide and Payne's Gray. Just a little bit of a darker color, and fill in the side of the cork. So I was totally experimenting with the cork here. I really had no idea how I wanted to do it. So I was just kind of playing around until I found it. Just mixed up a little bit more of a slightly darker color, and it ends up not being dark enough, but I come back and add a little bit more later. So I ran it across the bottom edge, and then I'm just blending it up with that lighter color. More burnt umber, and there was a little bit of a band on the image. It looked like there was a little bit of a brown band on the cork, but I didn't get the shape right, so it kind of threw it off a bit, but I end up covering it up mostly. I'm just adding a hint of texture into the cork with some of those darker colors, just lightly daubing at it, and that ended up looking a little tight and kind of, well, very, very phony to me, but the value on the cork isn't quite right yet anyway, so it's fine. Back into my unbleached. That's a clean brush, so I only picked up unbleached, and I'm almost just kind of dry brushing over this, making sure that a little bit of those colors still show through. But I feel like that did what I wanted it to do. Run some of that brighter color up over this top edge. Again, that's just unbleached. Some Payne's Gray. I'm just kind of playing with the shape of the cork. I felt like it was off, but then I feel like it wasn't, so I changed it. But just to illustrate that you can keep making adjustments. You know, if the shape of your cork feels wrong to you, mess with it. You know, tighten up the curve. And if that's wrong and you feel like it was right the last time, then expand the curve again. You can do it as many times as you need. Making sure I have a nice dark shadow on the table under the cork. Which reminded me that my shadow on the cork was not strong enough. So I am going to go back and darken that. Ultimately, you guys, I think that painting is less about, you doing things exactly right. And it's more about you just making a decision and sticking with it and doing it. And that's really what I did here. I had actually never painted this before. I just decided to paint it and turned on my camera, and I was just very mindful of the decisions that I was making and confident that I could change anything. Not confident that I knew how to change something, but that anything could be changed. And as long as I have that confidence and the willingness to try to fix something if I don't like it, then I'm much more likely to have a successful painting. And in my renting, I didn't tell you that I just picked up some Payne's Gray and a little bit of matte medium, and all I'm doing here is just filling in all of these little sections where I still have my grid lines showing, where I haven't put any paint. So everything that's not, like the wine glass or the background, it's just these weird little sections here where I haven't put anything. I'm just putting in some Payne's Gray, just getting that shadow in there. But that's really what I want you guys to do. I think that if you are patient with yourself, if you take the time to plan, and if you have the confidence that anything can be changed and you're willing to attempt to change things when they go wrong, I think you're going to find that your confidence grows by leaps and bounds, and that you're going to end up being happier with your paintings that succeed. That doesn't mean that every single painting you're going to do is going to succeed. By all means, for every painting I do successfully, I probably have several behind it that did not turn out successfully or that I abandoned for one reason or another. But years ago when I started making videos, I never would have just turned on the camera and started painting without having practiced that painting numerous times first. But, while certainly my skill has grown since then, the main thing that I think has grown is my confidence. I have more experience and I'm much more confident than I used to be. And I believe that's the main difference. Here, I'm still just using Payne's Gray. I'm still just filling in those weird little spots that don't really have anything going on but a dark shadow. Still using my number 8 filbert, some burnt umber, some Payne's Gray, a little bit of matte medium. And the shadow on the cork. I'm just making that bottom edge and swooping up a little bit, nice and dark on the cork. It almost matches the value of the table right where the cork touches it. It's almost just as dark as the table. And I was just doing it very loosely, just kind of splop down that dark color and then smear it out with my finger. The cork is dry, so it's not blending. A little bit of matte medium. If I have any edges that just won't blur out, the matte medium helps them kind of blur. Much better. Back to my number 2 round, getting some yellow oxide, some indanthrene, or whatever blue you used in the bottle. A little bit of Payne's Gray. And we're going to do the stems. Now these stems get crazy. They get really awful. I'm just generally kind of plopping in where they are. My shapes get weird. They get really big. A little bit of burnt sienna and just kind of dash on here and there. But this is what I'm talking about with confidence. These stems look so bad but my confidence kept me going rather than, I didn't come to a screeching halt to fix those ugly stems. I just kept going because I knew I could fix it later. Just getting the colors and the basic shapes on. A little more yellow oxide. Just a few little highlighted points on there. See, because all of these stems are in the dark shadowed area, I knew that I could just take my Payne's Gray and paint around them again and take away bits that I didn't like. So that's why I wasn't worried about it. Now I have a clean brush, getting my Payne's Gray, and I'm cutting into them and getting rid of bits where I felt like the stems were too wide or too long. Make them look a little bit more like grape stems. And once that Payne's Gray dries, you won't even be able to tell where I scrubbed around the edges of those. A little bit more of that yellow, I just want to pop a couple highlights on it. And now I'm quite happy with the way those stems look. And just indicate another little one right there. All right, back to our burnt sienna, our yellow oxide, a hint of Payne's Gray, not a lot. And we're gonna just finish up the edge of the table. I feel like it's just about there. Keeping those brush strokes straight up and down because that will help indicate that it's a flat surface facing us. I mix quite a bit of unbleached in there with the yellow-brown mixture, and that's going to be our reflection color. As I move away from where it's the brightest, I'm just lightening my pressure so it's just kind of dry brushing just a little bit of that color on. A little bit of Payne's back into those mixtures without the unbleached so we can move into the area on the other side. Again, keeping those brush strokes straight up and down. Don't get angled, because that will change the shape of your table. More Payne's Gray now, working on that dark edge. I'm not worried about the background. I haven't painted the background yet, so I just let it kind of go outside of the shape if it needs to. Just touching up the table a little bit on the surface, brightening up some areas, checking the shape of it. It felt a little off to me. Kind of scumbling with the tip of that angle brush. Just a little hint of that bright reflection color right on the very edge in a few places on the table, because I felt like that really gave it a little bit more character and kind of helped say that that's a corner. All right, I'm back onto my number 2 round, and we're gonna start adding the highlights to our glass. So I'm gonna get some white and some matte medium, and I'm gonna start just lightly, very delicately, adding the highlight in. And like I said, I don't really want the edge of the highlight to be very, very crisp, very, very hard. I want there to be a hint of softness between the highlight and the color of the bottle. So I'm getting some matte medium and going over that edge, but really it didn't do what I wanted it to do on this top part, so it looks a little strange, but I come back later and fix it. So in the next section down, I'm just taking more care, going over the edge very gently so that I don't get an ultra crisp line. And to get, you know, a pure white highlight, you might have to do 2 coats of the white. I certainly did. The white here is kind of where I feel like it all comes together. This is kind of the reward at the end of the painting, is, you know, doing the bright white. Up until this point, everything kind of feels boring. There's not a lot of, you know, dramatic lighting. There's not a lot of real interesting bits until we get to this part. And just fix that up, fill it in with a little bit more solid white. Tiny hint of Payne's gray mixed in with that titanium white, and a tiny hint of indanthrene mixed in there. A good amount of matte medium. I want this color to be pretty transparent because I have another reflection over here, but it's not pure white. So I'm just lightly scratching that color on there. A little more matte medium, make sure it's nice and transparent. And I'm going to scratch that same color down just a little bit on this side. So the white indicates where the light is shining directly onto the glass. This blue kind of indicates areas where other elements are reflecting their light onto the glass. Here I'm using that same bluish color right at the top of this large reflection on the bottle, because as it kind of curves, the reflection gets a bit more transparent in the image. So that's the effect I was going for. Now I moved into the pure white, and I'm going to fill in this whole reflection area. Just lightly scumble it into that kind of bluish transparent bit. Again, I'm working at this kind of slowly, trying to make sure that some of those edges are just a little bit on the softer side. Doing some dry brushing and scumbling. You can't see it, but I still have my phone out so that I can keep a really close eye on the shape and everything of the elements that I'm working on. Now I went to my number 8 filbert because this next part is just a big long rectangle of solid white. So I'm using my number 8 filbert to just fill that in. Onto our wine glass, still using the number 8 filbert and just white. Start working on some of the little areas where I can see these bright white highlights in my reference image. This one is only bright white on the top half. On the bottom half, while it still visually represents a bright white highlight, you can see the wine through the color, through the white. So that's why I'm not taking it all the way down. Same here, I've got that bright white right there. And visually it transfers all the way down the glass. But to translate that to canvas, we have to change that color. So I'm only taking the white in the top half. Some matte medium, nice and transparent. Here I am kind of sketching it down because I lost that shape, but that's not the right color. So even though the white is transparent, it's not really the right color. Just some little suggestions of highlight right there along the edge. See, I'm not fully outlining that. Into the alizarin crimson and some of the red. There's a hint of dioxin there. And I'm going to work on fixing up the shape of my glass again, because it's still pretty crazy shaped over there. I know you can't see right there. Sorry. I was in the zone. I wasn't paying attention to my camera. But see, just little corrections. I'm just going outside of that shape. Just little corrections. I'd rather do 20 little tiny corrections than one big correction and have to go back and correct the correction. Now I'm going to add some white into that color, and I know this is going to seem really crazy. But I'm going to start filling in some of these other little reflections that I see. A little bit of that over this bright white there as well. A little bit of a darker color with more dialogues, and I'm going to do the top edge of the, like the surface of the wine there, where we're in the reflection. Add a little bit more white to that, so it's kind of purpley pink. More of that color. A little bit more of the red and a little bit more white in it. And we'll fill in the bottom half of that bright white reflection. And like I said, when you're close up like this and you're working on each section one at a time, things start to feel real crazy. And you might be tempted to look at it as you're doing it and think, this looks horrible, you should stop what you're doing immediately. But don't. See it through to the end, and if you need to make adjustments then, make adjustments then. All right, same thing over here. I'm really using a pretty similar color on this bit of reflection. Hint of a lighter color. And I'm actually blending it into that darker color on the other side. That felt right to me. It's not really how it is in my reference image, but a little matte medium to help facilitate that blend. And the surface tension, just lighten that up a little bit. A little matte medium. I'm going for that same blue color. It's the white, the Payne's Gray, and the Indanthrene with a lot of matte medium to make it very transparent. And that's what I'm going to do on this one. Just some matte medium to spread that color around. This little reflection that I'm working on is on the opposite side of the glass. I think it's kind of like that bright white reflection on the front of the glass. This is that reflecting on the inside of the glass on the back, if that makes sense. This is a reflection of a reflection. Same color here. Just very transparent. I'm just kind of working on smoothing out the canvas texture through those colors there. A little bit more matte medium. And I'm actually going to glaze that color very, very thinly over top of these areas. So those colors are still there, but they're kind of being fogged out a little bit. And I felt like that helped give that bright white reflection look, even though it's not bright white at all. And same thing over here. Clean off that little bit with a damp brush. Just even some of that out, that texture. Tiny bit of white. Just brighten up that reflection a bit at the bottom. And then I'm just going to add little suggestions of kind of that transparent blue color, just here and there on the edges of the glass for some little minor reflections. Back into some just plain titanium white with a clean number 2, and we'll sketch on the reflections on the stem. Now, you could go crazy with the stem and really put in all of the little colors and variations and shapes that you see in the image, but I went pretty simple, and I really just added a few of the white lines that I saw and knocked them back with a slightly darker color when I needed to. But the stem, I figured it's not the most interesting part of the painting anyway, so there's no reason that I had to spend all kinds of time really being overly specific with the details on the stem. I felt like it was enough to just kind of suggest the details on the stem and let everything else really be the primary interesting points. I left actually a lot of my pencil lines showing here, which I thought was fine because I used kind of a brownish yellow color, which I felt like reflected the color of the wood and the table a bit. A little bit of Payne's gray, get a bit of a gray color. Add some of those secondary reflections. And I felt like that was all the stem of the glass really needed. I had a little bit of a warbly spot, so I am going to take it out with some Payne's gray. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with that stem, and I feel like it's about done. Little Payne's, get rid of that little bumpy bit on the stem. And straighten it out with a little bit of white. That blue-gray color again, and the glass is reflecting onto the bottle just a bit. So I'm just going to add really just a little bit of a swipe of that gray color in here. I started getting a little carried away and made it too dark. But as you can see, I didn't let it dry all the way, so I was able to wipe it back. But right there, I felt like it looked pretty good. There was a tiny hint of a brighter reflection in there, and I should have just stopped right there. But I didn't. A little bit more of that opaque color. And I absolutely did not like that. So a clean brush, there's just a little bit of water on there, and I'm just kind of wiping some of that away. Again, it's just a clean brush that I'm using. There's no paint on that brush. Much better. Same thing down here, just a little scoot of that bluish gray. Very, very transparent color. And now we're ready for the background. I started out with my number 12 cloud brush, but it really wasn't the right brush for this. So I just kind of start and then go back to my 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm just using the burnt sienna and yellow oxide here. Just kind of scrubbing them on. Cutting in around the edge of the cask. Letting the paint be a little transparent. These colors, you know, end up showing the black of the background through it a bit. And I don't fight that. I just let that happen. So I almost get a glazed look, even though I didn't actually glaze anything. And I am onto my 1/2 inch flat here. This is an old 1/2 inch flat, so I'm perfectly comfortable scrubbing with it. If it were a brand new one, I don't know that I would scrub with it. A little bit of Payne's Gray. I did not clean off my brush. And just scrubbing that in. Lightly scrubbing it when I meet the orange yellow, just to blend a bit. Only picking up Payne's Gray at this point. My cask, the shape is a little off right there on that edge, and I really desperately wanted to go fix it, but I was keenly aware that the video was creeping up on 3 hours at this point, so I just kind of left it. But if you realize that your cask is off right there, please take the time to fix it. I'll probably go back and fix it, but for the sake of the length of the video, I did not want to make you watch me paint the edge of that cask again for another 20 minutes. Just going back and forth between those same 3 colors. Solid Payne's Gray on a dry brush, or on a clean brush there, sorry, just to really get rid of those grid lines on the back and get everything wrapped up and looking finished. But see how those different colors on the wine glass, they looked so weird as we were adding them, but I feel like they look pretty good now. I'm pretty happy with them. And that is about it. I'm just slapping in the last bit of Payne's gray there around the edge of the table. And then I'm gonna sign it. So I would like to say thank you to my awesome sponsor, Frederick's, for providing these incredible canvases that I use. I absolutely love these canvas pads. And I would like to say thank you to all of you for hanging out. I know this has been a long video, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you paint it and show me what you did. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.